This is the Impact Report. I'm your host, Katie Ellman. The Impact Report brings together students and faculty in Bard College's MBA in Sustainability program with leaders in business, sustainability, finance, social entrepreneurship, and more. These conversations go live the first and third Friday of each month. This week, I'm joined by Eban Goodstein, Director of Bard College's Graduate Programs in Sustainability. Eban is an economist and director of the Bard Graduate Programs of Sustainability, which houses the Center for Environmental Policy and the Bard MBA in Sustainability. Eban led the expansion of the Center for Environmental Policy. Eban also founded the #1 ranked MBA in Sustainability in 2012. And in recent years, he's coordinated a series of national educational initiatives on climate change involving over 2,500 colleges, universities, high schools, and community organizations. He's the author of a college textbook, Economics and the Environment, now in its 9th edition. So welcome back to the Impact Report, Eban.
Katie, it's a pleasure to be here.
2023 marks the 20th anniversary of the first graduating class from the MS in Environmental Policy degree at Bard Center for Environmental Policy, the 10th graduating class from the Bard MBA in Sustainability program. Can you talk more about this milestone and what it means to you both personally and professionally?
Well, Katie, we're just coming off of a worldwide teach-in on global climate justice that we organized out of the Bard Center for Environmental Policy. I was working with a few graduate students, some staff. This was more than 300 events in 40 countries, 30,000 people involved. And just one story about these. There was an event at Lyon in France at the university there. And an engineer came up to one of the organizers afterwards, and he said, I'm graduating. I was planning to go work for the oil industry, but I just can't really do that anymore. It's just not what I can do with my life. And can you help me figure out what a different pathway is going to be? And I think that really is the story of what our work is all about, right? Young people are really coming to the realization that there is really important work to do in the world. There are profound injustices around climate, gender inequity, access to housing, basic food, ocean pollution, biodiversity loss, and they want to work on this. I mean, they don't want to just volunteer. They want to really be at the forefront of solving these big global problems. And the way we think about this at Bard is that if you want to do that, there's 3 ways to do it. You can change minds, and that's what happened to that young French engineer, and that's really education. You can change the rules, and that's policy, and we do a lot of work in the policy space. Or you can change the game, and that's business. Because no matter how many rules we change, and no matter how many minds we change, at the end of the day, we are at this moment where business has to radically reimagine what it's doing on the face of the planet, right? We've got to figure out how to keep the lights on, get food on our table, get our healthcare in ways that massively reduce environmental impact. So 80, 90% cuts in carbon pollution, but also plastics pollution, toxics, biodiversity loss. And companies also have to figure out how to treat workers and communities and suppliers with justice and with respect, because we can't have, environmentally sustainable companies that aren't also socially engaged. So the Bard experience has just been bringing all this together. I'm sometimes asked, what are you looking for in candidates who want to come to the program? And I say, we basically have 2 criteria for admission. We want smart people who want to change the world. And working with that group of folks has just been profoundly rewarding for me. I got into this work. I'd been teaching economics for 20 years, but I'd increasingly sort of was, kind of in personal, kind of existential mode about whether I really wanted to spend my life, teaching undergrads microeconomics. And so I'd actually started a climate education nonprofit while teaching. And the Bard opportunity has really sort of let me do that work full time. I had a chance to co-found the MBA with my amazing intellectual hero and the co-founder now of the MBA, Hunter Lovins. Had amazing opportunities to work with incredible faculty, staff, students, and Bard itself. Unique institution that's really been supportive of the kind of entrepreneurial education that we've been developing.
Well, that is an amazing journey and story, excuse me, about that French student. And I wonder, you make it sound so succinct and easy coming to this, but these are really big problems to solve. And it is existential. And as a follow-up to that, I just wonder how, as leaders and administrators in these programs, how that part is handled. How is I went through the program myself, but the urgency to mitigate these problems and come up with solutions to them, with also the very much in your face getting an education and training. Is that something you can speak to?
Yeah, I think the question is, how do we serve people who come to us? So these are folks who are mission oriented, and once again, they want to change the world, but they know they need three things. They need the best possible mix of academic training, they need real world experience, and they need career development so that they can step into positions, get good jobs where they can make a difference at scale in a hurry, when because on some of these issues we don't have a lot of time, right? And so what we've done at Bard is create graduate programs that are really very different than anybody else's. And one element of that is that they start out with an integrated core curriculum. So these are not kind of cafeteria style programs where you just take a bunch of courses over 2 years. We thought really hard about the kind of work that we want people to do, and the tools that they need to get. That opens up space for highly experiential education. And I should digress for a moment. What kind of degree programs do we offer? So we have the Change Minds degree, which is a Master's of Ed in Environmental Education. And that's really for people that want to grow and impact and make more powerful the network of primarily nonprofit actors that we find in every community, museums, science centers, education centers, environmental organizations that basically provide the core environmental education that young people desperately need, right? It's a screen generation, increasingly spending less time outside. How do we engage them with the fundamental lessons of ecological literacy that lead to those kinds of career decisions in the long run? We also offer kind of the change the rules set of degrees. So we have an MS Environmental Policy and MS Climate Science and Policy degrees. And those are for people that want to get rid of bad laws and regulations and put in good laws and regulations to drive sustainable outcomes. Obviously working in and around government, cities, towns, federal, state, global, UN, but also increasingly in big corporations, in sustainability offices, where a lot of that work is, how do I change the rules internal to organizations to drive sustainable outcomes? And of course, outside the system in NGOs as advocates and educators and lobbyists to try and drive change in government or in business. And then finally, in 2012, Hunter and I set up the MBA in sustainability, really one of the few and the best, officially, according to Princeton Review now, 3 years running, MBA that fully integrates a focus on mission-driven business and sustainability into a core MBA. So we teach marketing and strategy and finance and accounting, but every one of those classes is built around the idea of how do I use those skills to build a business that's in business to solve social and environmental problems. Got to make money, no margin, no mission, but at the end of the day, how do you put mission and sustainability first and then have profitability and financial success follow? So what we do, I mentioned one of the key features of all these programs is that very thoughtful, kind of integrated interdisciplinary core curriculum that frees up time for, in the case of the MED and MS programs, 4 to 6 month professional internships. So that's part of our master's degree, is that you leave BARD and you go to, Australia or Thailand or Geneva or South Africa or DC or New York, and you work full time 4 to 6 months. You're in touch with your thesis advisor, you develop a 25-page paper. So you really come out of our program with the kind of understanding of what this academics means in the real world. Strong resume, all that stuff really supports people getting good jobs in this space. On the MBA side, that's a lot of consulting. That's the structure of the MBA program in terms of experiential. All these programs, as I said, very career focused. Our mission is to change the world, and that means you guys need to be working. And I would say also, all of these programs are small by design. I mean, I never wanted to run a graduate program where I didn't know every student's name. And I just believe in that kind of education. I have kind of a liberal arts ethos in my DNA, literally. And it's just really important to me. And I think that's the best type of education in the world, is that high touch, high engagement kind of work.
Oh, that's very true of the experience, at least my experience in the MBA program. How, because the program has grown and evolved, can you talk a little bit about some of the changes that have happened and what you're anticipating may continue to change or evolve?
Yes. We are at our 20th and 10th anniversaries in terms of graduating classes this year. So the MS program started in 2002. What's unique about the graduate programs is that we are based at a liberal arts college. BARD is primarily, a 2,000 person undergraduate institution about 90 miles north of New York City. But it's unique in that it has some great graduate programs. We also do things like run one of the biggest prison programs in the country. We run early college high schools. We're doing lots of cool stuff globally, and I'll talk more about that. So it's a very ambitious place for being kind of a small liberal arts college. But the MS programs were really started in the early 2000s. Impetus was, climate change, biodiversity loss, the need to sort of train professionals in kind of science, law, economics. And then I came to BARD in 2009, added the MS in climate science and policy, the MBA in 2000, we opened in 2012, the MED in 2017. So we've been kind of adding out the suite of, change the world, change minds, change the game programs. I would say what's cool about them is that they haven't at their core changed. There's always been this real commitment to, again, thoughtful, integrated, interdisciplinary core curricula, leaving lots of space for experiential education, and then with a strong career focus and community focus. I will say on the MBA side, we've added concentrations in impact finance and circular value chain and sustainability consulting. On the policy side, we've added additional experiential work. So all of our students go to Oaxaca, Mexico for 12 days in the middle of the first year to kind of experience sustainability, sustainable development, sustainability policy from the ground up, kind of the community level. Obviously strengthen experiential and career elements of the course. The big change the last 2 or 3 years has been the explicit adoption of a commitment in all of our graduate programs to train anti-racist organizational leaders. So we define sustainability as shared well-being on a healthy planet, very simply. That captures the environmental side, a healthy planet, but it also grounds right up front the social side, right? Sustainability is about people, and it's about shared well-being for people. And obviously in a world of systemic racism, that's not possible. So we want all of our graduates, they're going to be leaders in business, education, policy, to be well equipped when they leave our program to dismantle systemic racism within their organizations, but also to think about how and modify and change how their business models or their policy ideas or their education initiatives are either, promoting or reinforcing, I'm sorry, promoting or taking apart, existing racist structures. So that's been, I think, really the biggest sort of piece in the last 2 or 3 years. In terms of what comes next, we don't change very much because what we do so well. We do have a global initiative, which I'll probably talk about in a few minutes.
I'm interested to hear more about the people that are teaching these future leaders and game changers. Can you talk more about how Bard GPS attracts and retains such world-class faculty?
Yes. So, I mean, this is really in our DNA because we are based at, a liberal arts college that where excellence in teaching is everything, right? And our faculty don't teach undergrads much. They don't teach PhD students. They are really focused on our master's students, and really giving them the same kind of attention that you would expect at a high class, top class liberal arts college. So I would say that on the MS side, I haven't had to do much because my core faculty were here when I got here. So they've been here for 15 or 20 years. And they're just amazing people. And what's really incredible about that curriculum is that it is highly integrated. So it's modular. So when students are doing air and atmosphere in their science classes, they're going to do that in their economics classes and their law and policy classes. Similarly with biodiversity loss or ag issues. So it's nowhere else in the world, I think, do you get the level of interdisciplinarity that we're able to offer in our program because it's a core curriculum and because these faculty have been teaching together for 15 years and they know what's going on in their other classes. They've literally taken them. They meet every week to talk about what they're talking about in their classes and how it relates across the disciplines. As we've added the programs, we've moved more to a practitioner model. I would say that my most important job as director is hiring great people. That's what I do all the time. But it's not particularly hard because our faculty is primarily people who are on the cutting edge of sustainability in their day jobs, and then they're bringing that into the classroom. And because we're in New York City, just the talent pool is super deep. And so we find people who are really on the edge of sustainability in terms of practice, who are deeply engaged intellectually, writing books, public speaking, thought leaders, and who are also great teachers. And then they stay with us because it's such an amazing community. No one wants to leave, so I would say it's my most important job, but it's really not that hard.
Well, that's good to hear. Now you have 20 years of the CEP MS students out in the world and 10 years of the Bard MBA students out in the world. What kind of impacts are these graduates and working professionals making in their own communities?
I would say that I have the best job in the world, especially in these difficult times. Because when I get depressed, I just engage with some of my students or my alums, and I just realize all the amazing stuff they're doing. So we've got, a woman, heading up a community development initiative in Buffalo and similar initiatives in Hartford and Lancaster, very challenged cities and towns that really need the help of our talented graduates. We had a guy who ran the Sierra Club's Stop Coal campaign. We've got people, moving up the ranks in sustainability at Danone and ING and Deutsche Bank and Estee Lauder and Etsy. One of our grads runs the NRDC's state level climate strategy and has been amazingly busy in the last 2 or 3 years as all of this great climate legislation, the dam's finally breaking, and we've seen so much government initiative coming out. One of our grads founded and another grad led the National Young Farmers Coalition, a group that has been dedicated to providing support for young organic and regenerative farmers. We've got folks at the big 4 consulting firms, KPMG and E&Y and Price Waterhouse, and as well as many other consulting firms. People doing mass transit in Atlanta. One of our grads is the chief representative for a country, the Dominican Republic, in the COP negotiations. We've got people driving net zero strategy from within companies, at the city level, states, US government, UN governance. So it's just really exciting to see ESG data, many people moving into CDP and other related organizations. It's a powerful group. It's a powerful group. And they are a group, right? There's a very cohesive sense of coming out of BARD and being part of this alumni community who are committed to changing the world.
It's really moving to me because you mentioned kind of when you feel down about the state of things and what speaking to students, and for me, speaking to friends from the program, and how you realize, you know, it's not just you, but the motivation, that's the motivation that keeps us going. And at each year, as a new group cohort enters the program, I'm sure there's a new rush of optimism to fix these things that buoys all of us to, you know that all hope isn't lost. But so this is a very large community at this point, and I'm interested to hear more about the recently expanded reach of BARD GPS to a global audience. Can you tell us about the newly launched Global Certificate in Social Enterprise?
Yes, I said earlier that we were happy with our graduate programs kind of being small by design, because that's the kind of education that we believe in. But we also need to scale. I mean, all of us need to scale our work or replicate it at some level. We can't just sit back and be satisfied with what we've done. So what we've done is we're working to create an education with global reach, but that retains the kind of high touch experience that is a signature of what we do in the BARD graduate programs. And so we created a new certificate program. It's called the Open Society University Network Global Certificate in Social Enterprise and Leading Change. And essentially it is 3 of the MBA courses. So it's our principles course, our social entrepreneurship course, and our social entrepreneurship course, which is about how do you change business from within. So it's a leading change and sustainability course. And we've turned it into what is essentially an undergraduate sustainability minor, trying to make this education available to under-resourced schools around the world who would love to have this kind of practical, but still kind of liberal learning focused suite of courses made available to their students. And the way it works is there's a global classroom. So once a week, we've got students dialing in to a single Zoom session from universities in Bangladesh and Palestine and Colombia and Bulgaria and Kyrgyzstan and Central Asia, as well as BARD and other schools in the United States. And they're all together sharing ideas, fishbowling their work. But then once a week, they have the high touch sort of opportunity to work with faculty members from their universities on their social entrepreneurship projects or their change-making projects. So it's, again, very experience-based. That's kind of the BARD signature. And we believe that this certificate has the ability to scale, so that we can be engaging hundreds of universities across the world in offering this curriculum and touching tens of thousands of students with the kind of education that we are delivering in our MS and MBA programs. So stay tuned for that one. We're having a big conference on that, actually April 20th. And we're super excited to begin to build the partnerships that are going to be required to really blow this out and multiply the size of the Army for sustainability that we need and that we're building.
That's really interesting. Now, this is, to learn more about the history of the program. I'd like to hear more about the history, but also just ask, would you when you started, did you ever think this would be happening?
Um, yeah, so that whole kind of idea of sort of entrepreneurship is an interesting one, right? Because I've essentially had the opportunity to be an educational entrepreneur. And, if you told me 20 years ago in particular that I was going to be running a business program in Manhattan, I would have said, what? So you never really know where you're going to go with this. But, I was just an economist who'd really been trained more on the policy side to think about environmental pollution problems. I wrote a textbook when I was in my early 30s, which is now, it's in, the ninth edition, called Economics in the Environment. But I did get kind of increasingly frustrated with my life as a college teacher, just as an educator, sort of teaching the same stuff that wasn't particularly relevant year after year. And so I started my own nonprofit organization in the late 90s, focused on climate education and mobilization and activism. And that kind of gave me this. One of the things we did actually was we had a thing called the Race to Stop Global Warming, which I wish somebody else would start up again. It's kind of a race for the cure type thing. And at its peak, we were running in 8 cities, and we would get 600-700 people showing up, Race to Stop Global Warming t-shirts. It was pretty cool. We had to shut it down. We didn't quite make money. But that, I began to accumulate sort of the kind of entrepreneurial skill set needed to start organizations, raise funds, that sort of thing. Did some really big national teach-ins in the mid 2000s on climate change. And that really gave me the skill set to step into the entrepreneurial task that Bard had set for me, which was, how do I compete with, the Dukes and Michigans and Columbias of the world with a graduate program at a small place like Bard. I'd become familiar with the MBA, sustainability from the ground up MBAs that got started in the early 2000s when I was out in Oregon, and really, wanted to bring that to the East Coast. Hunter Lovins and I were actually at COP15 in Copenhagen, which was a pretty grim time. That was when the whole top-down kind of approach fell apart. Lots of protests, lots of cops, lots of arrests. And but we decided then to start the MBA because, again, no matter how many rules got changed in Copenhagen, it was still going to be up to business. I brought it home to Bard, and the wonderful thing about Bard is I had to have one conversation. So no committees, no endless debate. They just said, don't lose money. And I didn't. And so it's been a really kind of exciting personal opportunity for me to bring all these skills and primarily people together. I mean, and Hunter, again, has been, an amazing opportunity to work with someone who wrote the book, literally, Natural Capitalism in 1999, that really launched this amazing global business sustainability movement. That is the kind of history of the programs.
What is the motivation to keep going? What's at stake if we don't get it right? How do you address these concerns with students and even faculty? How we know the motivation to do the work, but what's really at stake locally? I mean, we know globally, but there's a lot at stake. So how do you stay focused and also aware of the bigger picture?
I talked to a young person yesterday who is, like many of us, sort of wrestling with climate despair, right? The planet's getting hotter. It's going to be really hot the next couple of years because we're coming out of a La Nina and into an El Nino. We could easily blow through 1.5 degrees C next year, which would be mind-blowing and also really challenging for so many of us who have been working so hard to try and keep the planet under that threshold. So, we've been starting many of our events at Bard with a land acknowledgement. And I like it very much because it asks us to acknowledge the people who have been here before and also to honor our ancestors, our descendants. And, there have been people living here in New York's Hudson Valley for 10,000 years, right? And for most of that time, 95% of it pretty sustainably. For the last 400 years, obviously, an unsustainable system founded in genocide, racism, slavery, exploitation of nature and people. But there will be people living here for another 10,000 years. Humans are like weeds. We're not going anywhere. And so I think there's sort of this apocalyptic sense that somehow the world's going to come to an end, in the next 100 years. And that's just ain't so, right? That's a privileged viewpoint. There will be people around. And so I think, and we're living at a truly extraordinary moment in terms of agency, right? In many ways, there's never been a more exciting and decisive time to be alive than today, because what, we have at our fingertips, kind of the tools and the business models and the networks, and the ability to profoundly make the future a better place, right? Or not, right? Because the work that we're going to do in the next 3 decades, particularly around climate, is going to affect not only our own lives and the lives of our children, but in fact, 500 generations to follow. We've had 500 generations behind us. There's 500 generations to follow. And the people will look back at this decade and say, what did you do? 10,000 years from now, this will be the decade that will determine the nature of the climate, and what species survive, to provide a palette for future generations to engage with. So, yeah, that's a lot on our shoulders, but it's also a lot of opportunity. And you just have to decide how you want to live your life, right? In the face of this profound injustice that we see unfolding around us, but also the profound opportunity to create justice on the planet going forwards.
As our time comes to an end, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the events that are coming up that may be of interest to listeners, and how people can learn more about BARD GPS.
Glad to do that. And so if you happen to be one of our alums, I hope to see you at our gala 10th, 20th anniversary on May 6th in New York City. We have a number of summer events, including our distinguished lectureship on emerging ESG regulation. The certificate program, again, we're looking for people, educators, others who would be interested in bringing this to their community, their local university, their local college, their local community college. So glad to talk with people about how to expand the type of education that we're providing at BARD, this education for change makers, for leaders. And then finally, we've got the worldwide teach-in on climate and justice coming your way in 2024. Again, I feel like the climate movement is kind of revitalizing and coming out of the shutdown that happened in 2019 or 2020. And we need that energy, we need that power. Everybody knows a teacher, everybody knows a student. All of those teachers and students need to get involved with the teach-in. Finally, I'd recommend a movie that just came out, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Check it out. I think it's really providing food for thought about the moment. And I've always been a believer in social movements and the power of social movements. And I think that the most important piece right now is I've been using this metaphor of climate repair, right? Is that we kind of need to live our lives as repair people. That's kind of a good metaphor. So, you go to work during the day and you do some climate repair, and then you come home at night and you go to sleep, and, you live your life and you spend time with your family and you do all the things that repair people do. But that's who we need to identify as. And whatever kind of work that is for you, whether it's art or zoology, writing, chemistry. There are places for all of us to be climate repair people. And whatever we can do to facilitate that, please let's be in touch. Lots of other good people in the world doing good work as well, and we just need to find each other.
Well, that's a great way to end this interview, and I look forward to being a climate repairer with you and everybody else. But thank you so much, Eban.
Thanks, Katie. Bye-bye.
We appreciate our loyal Impact Report listeners and hope you can help us spread the word about the series and the important sustainability work of our guests. Please rate and review the Impact Report wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you were inspired by this conversation, share a screenshot on Instagram and tag Impact Report Podcast. Learn more about the topics discussed in today's episode by visiting gps.bard.edu. And be sure to head to greenbiz.com or impactentrepreneur.com to read a recap of our conversation. Join us for the next episode of the Impact Report on Friday, April 28th. We'll be speaking with Devin Drew, founder of DFD Partners. Interested in learning how you can launch a high-impact, purpose-driven career in sustainability? Check out the resources page from the Bard Graduate Programs in Sustainability for access to free resources to jumpstart your career. Hear from leaders in the fields of climate change, consulting, impact finance, circular economy, and more about how they launch their careers and the tips they have for you to join their industries. Visit gps.bard.edu/resources today.